What if coaching wasn't just a set of recently created professional techniques meant to elevate our modern lives, but was part of a much older, even mythic journey of transformation? One that echoes the ancient rites of passage found across every single culture. Well, I believe it is, and let me explain why. If you're not familiar with the terms hero's or heroine's journey for that matter, let me start with a quick catch-up. The hero's journey was a term coined by the mythologist Joseph Campbell in his 1949 bestseller, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. In there, Campbell described how most of the great mythic journeys traced a really astonishingly similar narrative path, what many call a monomyth, a great tale that underscores all of the tales. It's one of a call to action. The protagonist or the hero realizes that they need to set out for some larger purpose, to some quest or mission. They often seek counsel and guides. They head off into the liminal underworld and the unknown beyond their usual everyday. And after a whole series of adventures, wins and losses and learning, they eventually return, though inevitably wiser and altered. These tales show up everywhere, from the Greek Odyssey, the Icelandic sagas, the South Asian tales of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, many of the indigenous tales, the European myths, and right through to Rey and Luke of the modern Star Wars series. All tell a great core monomyth of journeys into growth and self-discovery, right? While I definitely aim to use the term hero in a non-gendered way here, I'm also very aware of the quite appropriate feminist critiques of some of Campbell's views, and not least by Jungian psychotherapist and his former student, Maureen Murdoch, who has commented that the feminine journey is about going down deep into soul healing and reclaiming, while the masculine journey is up and out to spirit. Now, I'm not going to debate this here beyond saying that to me, both versions, hero or heroine, seem to be about journeys of great inner discovery, of healing, of reconciliation, and opening to a much bigger sense of self, to a developmental journey. And that is very much why I see the parallel between the coaching journey and the heroic monomythic journey. Well, I will add that it is a certain type of coaching approach that does so. The type that is aiming to facilitate a developmental shift in the client rather than simply to support some upskilling or achieve a performance goal. I recently completed a paper ready for submission that I've titled Crossing the Threshold, Applying Rites of Passage to Developmental Coaching Practice, which discusses all of this, the heroic archetype and its relationship to what are called rites of passage, because the source stories for Campbell's theories are all tracing the arc of these same universal human practices of change and transition. The term rites of passage was coined by an early 20th century French anthropologist, Arnold van Gennep, to collectively describe ceremonies or rituals that facilitate or initiate important life transitions, such as moving from childhood to adult, or weddings, for example, funerals, and some even call the modern counterparts of graduations to be some kind of form of rites of passage. Van Gennep put forward three key components of all rites of passages, and these are separation, liminality, and incorporation. Now, if you look at the three, and you can see them beside a visual rendering of Campbell's hero's journey, you can easily see that Campbell was simply referencing Van Gennep's model, but with a few more details, and that they speak more clearly to these great tales. My contention is that in many ways, we coaches are also fulfilling the role of guide, mentor, facilitator in the same process that is crucial to both the age-old heroic journeys, but also so can we be seen as a version of the rites of passage guide. Might seem a step too far, but let me explain. The experienced voice this is, who can never tell you what to do, but can ask questions, make suggestions, and establish the conditions for transformation to occur. In the really great heroic tale of Parzival, the errant knight Parzival, the hero, has a fateful early meeting with the Arthurian Fisher King, this great character, who has a mortal, excruciating wound that never heals. We observers know that relief for the king would come from Parzival asking a question, which in fact he never does, or it never comes until far more occurs in the tale, much, much later. And that's also part of his whole quest, is to be able to ask this great question. But it is a question that unlocks the king's issue, a powerful question, something all too familiar to coaches, right? Another fascinating insight into the relationship between the hero's journey and coaching comes from a 2023 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and it was titled "Seeing Your Life Story as a Hero's Journey Increases Meaning in Life." And in there, the authors tell us that they conducted a series of 8 studies in total, and they showed a significant increase in participants' experience of meaning in their lives. Now, through a whole series of interventions, which included prompting people to reflect on important elements of their lives and then connecting them and retelling them in a coherent, compelling hero's journey type narrative, that their population, their participants of all ages, were able to find more meaning in their journey to date, but more importantly, to imbue where they're going with a greater sense of meaning and fulfillment, right? So the authors tell us these results provide initial evidence that enduring cultural narratives like the hero's journey, I would say the hero's journey, both reflect meaningful lives and can help create them. Isn't that just so important? So whether as a coaching intervention, as this clearly was, or as an analogue of the developmental coaching process, the hero's journey / rites of passages have considerable correspondence with the world of coaching. Yet, in all my time, I've personally never heard anyone in the industry ever say such a thing. And why would that be? Well, personally, I think some of the reasons might even be found in reflecting on the popularity of this hero's journey, which is in many ways just a Western contemporary way of discussing these ancient pan-cultural practices of rites of passage. And these highlight a more indigenous and traditional transformational model. Now, coaching is clearly trying hard to be seen as a really modern, evidence-based profession. And I see a certain bias within the industry that likes the simplicity and the sort of modernity and seeming clarity and the empirical nature that many coaching techniques seem to offer. Personality profiling, strengths assessments, positive psychology evaluations, and all these tools that coaches grab onto give them easy to follow guidelines and maps for their engagements and nice sort of studies to point to and underscore how well validated these are. Whereas these other models of the human, including, we could call it the hero's journey, tend to take a wilder, less certain path. Now, in our emergent coach training program, we've been running nature-based retreats modeled on the rites of passage approach for almost a decade. And I actually have colleagues in the coaching industry, admittedly they're more on the edges, who even advocate a full-on wilderness solo rites of passage experience to provoke insights in some of their clients, the ones who are willing to go to that edge. Now, these are not part, or maybe they will never be part of most coaches' toolkits, but maybe we need to rethink at least some of this, to ask ourselves, why not? Or what part of this could be really helpful? When these ancient transition models have proved so effective for so long in so many cultures, what is it we can learn from them? I know I have my answers to these questions, and if anything, I'd like to leave you with them, with your questions around these, to find your own. Of course, if you'd like to discover what I am doing, then just reach out. I always love to connect.